The snow was falling like whispered prayers that December evening, each flake catching the amber glow of the streetlights as I walked toward my son's house. My arms were heavy with wrapped presents and a warm casserole dish that still steamed beneath the foil. The scent of roasted turkey and herbs drifted up, mixing with the crisp winter air that bit at my cheeks. I could hear Christmas music spilling out from behind the frosted windows, punctuated by the laughter of my grandchildren. 8-year-old Emma's giggle was unmistakable, followed by little Tommy's excited squeal. These sounds had once been the soundtrack to my own Christmas Eves, back when my late wife Sarah would hum along while adjusting the tree lights, and my son David would sneak cookies from the kitchen counter. But Sarah had been gone for 3 years now, and those warm family gatherings had grown colder with each passing holiday. Still I came. I always came. Because that's what fathers do, how we show up, even when the welcome mat feels less certain beneath our feet. The house looked beautiful tonight. David had strung lights along the roofline, just like I'd taught him when he was 12. The windows glowed with that perfect golden warmth that only Christmas Eve can create. I could see shadows moving inside, my family preparing for the holiday without me, though they knew I was coming. We'd spoken just yesterday. I shifted the casserole to one arm and reached for the doorbell, my breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Inside, I could hear David's voice calling to someone, probably telling them to get the door. My heart swelled with anticipation. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe this year we'd recapture some of that old magic. The footsteps approached, and I straightened my shoulders, forcing a smile despite the cold that had settled deep in my bones. The door opened just wide enough for David to peer out, his face illuminated by the porch light. But there was no smile, no warmth. His eyes, so much like his mother's, held something I'd never seen before, a cold distance that made my stomach drop. "Dad," he said, not opening the door any wider. Behind him I could see the Christmas tree twinkling, presents already piled beneath it. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine, like home should smell. "What are you doing here?" "What do you mean?" I laughed nervously, holding up the casserole. "It's Christmas Eve. We talked about this yesterday. I brought the green bean casserole Sarah always made, and I have presents for the kids." David's jaw tightened. He glanced back into the house, and I heard a woman's voice, my daughter-in-law Jessica, calling out something I couldn't quite catch. When he turned back to me, his face had hardened even more. "Dad, look, we don't have room for you this year. Jessica's parents are here, and with all the kids and everything." He trailed off, but his eyes never met mine. "It's just too crowded." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the casserole dish growing heavy in my hands, the warmth seeping through my gloves. "Too crowded," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "David, it's Christmas Eve. I'm your father." "I know who you are," he said, and there was an edge to his voice now. "But Jessica thinks it would be better if you just went home tonight. We'll call you tomorrow, okay? After we get through all the family stuff. Family stuff. As if I wasn't family. As if 38 years of raising him, of working double shifts to pay for his college, of walking him down the aisle at his wedding, meant nothing. The snow continued to fall around us, and I could feel it melting on my face, cold drops mixing with something warmer. "David, please," I said, stepping closer to the door. But he stepped back, his hand tightening on the doorframe. Behind him, Emma appeared, her face bright with excitement. "Grandpa," she called out, trying to push past her father. "Did you bring us presents?" "Emma, go back inside," David said sharply, not taking his eyes off me. "Now." The little girl's face fell, confusion replacing joy. She looked between her father and me, sensing the tension even if she didn't understand it. David gently but firmly guided her away from the door. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't sorry at all. "Maybe next year will be different." And then the door closed. Not slammed, but closed with a quiet finality that somehow hurt worse than any dramatic gesture. I stood there for a moment, listening to the lock turn, holding a casserole that would never be shared, and presents that would never be opened. The walk back to my car felt like walking through quicksand. Each step crunched in the snow, the sound echoing off the silent houses where other families were gathering, other fathers were being welcomed home. The cold had seeped through my coat now, settling into my chest, where it mixed with something much worse than winter air. I sat in my car for a long moment, the engine running, but the heater doing nothing to warm the ice that had formed around my heart. Through the windshield I could see David's house glowing like a beacon, perfect and untouchable. The present sat beside me on the passenger seat. A art kit for Emma, a remote control car for Tommy, a bottle of wine I'd been saving for David and Jessica. The drive home passed in a blur of streetlights and Christmas decorations. Every house I passed seemed to mock me with its warmth. Families were visible through windows, gathered around dinner tables and Christmas trees. Children were running through hallways in pajamas, probably unable to sleep from excitement. Normal families wanted families. My own house, when I finally reached it, sat dark and empty. I'd left in such a hurry to get to David's that I hadn't even turned on the porch light. The key felt foreign in my hands as I fumbled with the lock. The casserole dish still somehow balanced in my other arm, though I couldn't remember why I was still carrying it. Inside, the silence was deafening. No Christmas music, no laughter, no warmth except what the furnace provided. I set the casserole on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long moment. Sarah had taught me to make it the year before she died, insisting I learn all her recipes. Just in case, she'd said, with that smile that always made everything seem possible. I found myself walking through the house, seeing it as if for the first time. Every family photo on the mantel, every memory embedded in these walls. David's high school graduation picture smiled down at me from above the fireplace. His wedding photo sat on the end table, the one where he'd insisted I stand right beside him because my dad is the most important person in my life, the most important person in his life. Too crowded to have a place at the table. I sank into Sarah's old armchair, the one I'd never been able to bring myself to get rid of. Her scent was long gone, but somehow the chair still felt like her embrace. And sitting there in the dark, listening to the snow tap against the windows, I let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. My son had locked me out. On Christmas Eve, after everything we'd been through together, after all the sacrifices and love and years of building what I thought was an unbreakable bond, he'd chosen a crowded house over his father's presence. I couldn't sleep that night, so I found myself in the study at 3 a.m, surrounded by boxes I hadn't opened since Sarah's funeral. Tax documents, insurance papers, old letters, the paper trail of a life fully lived. But it was the manila envelope in the bottom drawer of my desk that held my attention now. Inside was my will, last updated 2 years ago after Sarah passed. Everything was spelled out in careful legal language. The house, the land it sat on, my retirement savings, the life insurance payout I'd never touched. All of it designated for David, my only child, my heir, the one I'd assumed would carry on our family legacy. I spread the documents across the desk under the warm glow of the banker's lamp Sarah had given me for our 20th anniversary. The numbers were substantial, more than David knew actually. I've been careful with money my entire life, working extra shifts at the factory, investing wisely, denying myself small luxuries so that my family would always be secure. The house alone was worth nearly $400,000 now. I'd bought it for $32,000 back when David was just a baby, and Sarah and I had poured our hearts into every renovation, every improvement. The kitchen where she'd taught David to cook, the basement where I'd helped him build his first Pinewood Derby car, the backyard where we'd hosted his graduation party. My retirement account had grown to over $600,000 through decades of careful saving. Every overtime hour I'd worked, every vacation we'd postponed, every dinner out we'd skipped, all so that David would never have to struggle the way I had growing up. The life insurance money from Sarah's policy sat untouched in a separate account, another $250,000 that I'd been saving for emergencies that never seemed to come. I pulled out the calculator and added it all up. David stood to inherit nearly $1.5 million from a father he couldn't make room for at his Christmas table. But it was the other papers in the box that really caught my attention. Letters. David had written me over the years. Thank you notes for birthday money when he was in college. A Father's Day card from 5 years ago that read, "Dad, you've always been my hero. I hope I can be half the man you are." A letter from his wedding day, pressed between the pages of the photo album, telling me how grateful he was for everything I'd sacrificed to give him a good life. "Everything I have I owe to you," he'd written in that letter. I promise I'll never forget where I came from or who helped me get here. But promises, I was learning, were fragile things. They could shatter as easily as the trust between a father and son on a cold December night. I sat back in the leather chair and looked around the study. This room had been my sanctuary for 30 years, the place where I'd paid bills and planned for the future and dreamed about the day I could pass everything on to David. Now it felt like a mausoleum, filled with the remnants of relationships I'd thought were unbreakable. For the first time in my life, I found myself questioning whether David deserved the inheritance I'd spent decades building for him. But then I remembered Emma's face in the doorway, bright with excitement at seeing her grandpa before her father pulled her away, and Tommy, who always ran to give me the biggest hugs, who called me Grampy in that sweet lisp of his because he couldn't quite say Grandpa yet. They hadn't done anything wrong. They were 8 and 5, innocent victims of their parents' decisions and their grandfather's hurt feelings. Emma, with her mother's dark hair and my late wife's gentle eyes, who loved to paint and always saved her best artwork for me. Tommy, who looked so much like David had at that age, with his gap-toothed grin and endless questions about how everything worked. I walked to the mantel and picked up the photo from last summer's family barbecue. The 4 of us, David, Jessica, and the kids, standing around the grill in my backyard. Emma was wearing the butterfly necklace I'd bought her for her birthday, and Tommy was clutching the baseball glove I'd gotten him when he started Little League. They both looked so happy, so carefree. They didn't know their father had just broken their grandfather's heart. They didn't understand that their parents had decided there wasn't room at the Christmas table for the man who'd helped provide the very house they lived in. All they knew was that Grampy hadn't been there to see them open presents, hadn't been there to watch them play with their new toys. I thought about all the times I'd babysat them when David and Jessica wanted date nights. Emma would curl up next to me on the couch while I read her stories, her little hand in mine, completely trusting. Tommy would fall asleep in my lap during movies, drooling on my shirt, and I'd sit perfectly still for hours rather than disturb his peace. These children loved me unconditionally. They didn't care that I was getting older, that my hands shook sometimes when I poured their juice, that I told the same stories over and over. When they saw me, their faces lit up with pure joy. When had David stopped looking at me that way? Standing there in the pre-dawn darkness, holding that photo, an idea began to form in my mind. It was radical, possibly stupid, but it felt right in a way that nothing had felt right in months. David had made his choice. He'd chosen his wife's comfort over his father's presence. He'd chosen a crowded house over family loyalty. He'd chosen to forget where he came from and who had helped him build the life he now lived. But Emma and Tommy hadn't made that choice. They were still innocent, still loving, still deserving of the security and opportunities that the family money could provide. They were my grandchildren, my blood, my legacy in a way that perhaps David no longer was. What if the inheritance didn't have to go to David? What if there was another way to ensure the family legacy continued, one that honored the love I felt for those children while acknowledging the betrayal I'd experienced from their father? The more I thought about it, the more sense it made. David had a good job, a nice house, a stable life. He didn't need my money to survive. But Emma and Tommy, they could use it for college, for their own homes someday, for the kind of security that would give them choices in life. And there was something poetic about it, something that felt like justice rather than revenge. David would have to watch his children inherit the fortune he'd thrown away through his own cruelty. 3 days after Christmas, I sat across from Harold Martinson in his downtown office, watching the elderly lawyer's eyebrows climb higher and higher as I explained what I wanted to do. "Robert," he said finally, leaning back in his leather chair, "I have to ask, are you sure about this? This is a substantial change to your estate plan, and it's rather drastic." Harold had been my lawyer for 15 years, had handled Sarah's estate when she passed, had seen me through the worst period of my life. He was one of the few people who knew the full scope of what I was planning to give away, or rather, redirect. "I'm sure," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I want to establish trust funds for Emma and Tommy. They get access to portions of it for college expenses, and then full control when they turn 30. David gets nothing. Nothing." Harold removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. A habit I'd learned meant he was thinking carefully. "Robert, that's a very significant decision. Have you considered the potential family ramifications?" I almost laughed at that. Family ramifications, as if there was still a family to worry about. "Harold, let me tell you what happened on Christmas Eve," I said, and I told him everything. The door closing in my face, the words too crowded. The way my son had looked at me like I was an unwelcome stranger rather than the man who'd raised him. Harold listened without interruption, his expression growing more somber as the story unfolded. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the grey December sky. "I understand you're hurt," he said finally. "And I understand why you want to do this. But Robert, wills written in anger often lead to decades of family litigation. Are you prepared for David to contest this? Because he almost certainly will." "Let him try," I said, and I meant it. "The money is mine to distribute as I see fit, and I think Emma and Tommy deserve it more than their father does." Harold nodded slowly. "Legally, you're absolutely right. And if you structure it correctly, it will be very difficult for David to challenge." But emotionally, he trailed off, then fixed me with a direct look. "This will likely end your relationship with your son permanently. There may be no coming back from this." I thought about that for a moment, about the finality of what I was proposing. But then I remembered standing on David's doorstep in the snow, holding gifts that would go unwrapped and food that would go unshared. "Harold," I said quietly, "I think that relationship ended on Christmas Eve. I'm just making it official." The lawyer spent the next 2 hours walking me through the details. Trust funds that would protect the money from any poor decisions the children might make. Education provisions that would ensure they could attend any college they wanted. Safeguards that would prevent David or Jessica from accessing the funds for their own use. The beauty of this structure, Harold explained as he drafted the documents, is that it's irrevocable. Once this is signed and notarized, even if you change your mind, the money belongs to those children. David will have no legal claim to it whatsoever. As I watched him type, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Christmas Eve, a sense of control. For 3 days, I'd been the victim of someone else's choices. Now I was making choices of my own, choices that would echo through generations. "There's one more thing," I said, as Harold printed the final documents. "I don't want David to know about this until after I'm gone. Can we arrange that?" Harold paused, considering. "We can. Though I have to warn you, surprises like this in wills often cause more pain than necessary. Are you sure you don't want to tell him yourself?" I thought about confronting David, about seeing his face when he learned what his Christmas Eve cruelty had cost him. Part of me wanted that confrontation, wanted to see him realize what he'd thrown away, but a larger part of me just wanted peace. I was tired of fighting, tired of begging for scraps of affection from my own child. Better to let the lawyers handle it after I was gone, when it would be too late for apologies or manipulation. No, I said firmly. Let it be a surprise. That first Christmas morning without family was the quietest I'd experienced in 38 years. No running footsteps on hardwood floors, no squeals of delight over unwrapped presents, no Sarah humming in the kitchen while she prepared our traditional breakfast. Just me, a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I'd always been an early riser, but that morning I was awake before dawn, sitting in my kitchen and watching the sun slowly illuminate the backyard where David had learned to throw a baseball, where Emma and Tommy had played on the swing set I'd built for them 2 summers ago. The presents I'd bought for the grandchildren sat unopened on my coffee table. I'd thought about dropping them off at David's house, leaving them on the doorstep like some sort of Christmas ghost, but pride had stopped me. If he didn't want me at his table, then he didn't deserve the gifts I'd chosen with such care. Around noon, my phone rang. For a moment, my heart leapt. Maybe it was David, calling to apologize, to invite me over for dinner, to admit that Christmas wasn't the same without me. But when I looked at the caller ID, it was my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, checking to see if I was okay because she hadn't seen any cars in my driveway. I'm fine. Dorothy, I told her, though we both knew it wasn't true. Just having a quiet day. After she hung up, the silence felt even more profound. I found myself wandering through the house, seeing memories everywhere. The dining room where we'd hosted Christmas dinner for years, Sarah's good china still in the cabinet, waiting for celebrations that would never come. The living room where David had opened presents as a child, his face glowing with excitement in the light of the Christmas tree. But there was something different about the silence now, something that hadn't been there before my visit to Harold's office. It wasn't just the emptiness of loss, it was the quiet satisfaction of a decision made, of justice set in motion even if it wouldn't be realized for years to come. I thought about Emma and Tommy, probably playing with their new toys, unaware that their grandfather was sitting alone just a few miles away. Someday, when they were older, they would understand what had happened here. They would learn that their father's choices had consequences, that cruelty toward family came with a price, and perhaps, when they were adults with children of their own, they would remember their grandfather not as the bitter old man who'd been excluded from Christmas, but as the one who'd ensured their futures were secure regardless of their parents' decisions. The legal documents sat in my safe, signed and notarized irrevocable as death itself. David didn't know it yet, but his inheritance was already gone, redistributed to children who still loved their grandfather unconditionally. For the first time in days, I smiled. Part 8, the confrontation 6 weeks later. In February's bitter cold, David appeared at my door. But this time, he wasn't the one in control. This time, he needed something from me. I heard his car in the driveway before I saw him, that expensive sedan I'd helped him buy 2 years ago when his credit wasn't quite good enough for the loan he wanted. Through the window, I watched him sit in the driver's seat for several minutes, probably working up the courage to knock. When the doorbell finally rang, I took my time answering it. David stood on my doorstep, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, his face red from both cold and what looked like embarrassment. "Dad," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Can I come in? We need to talk." I stepped aside without a word, and he followed me into the living room where he'd grown up, where he'd done homework at the coffee table and watched Saturday morning cartoons on the couch that was still there, still in the same place it had been for 20 years. "How have you been?" he asked, settling into the armchair across from me with obvious discomfort. "Fine," I said simply. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. David cleared his throat and looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. Maybe he was, maybe he'd forgotten what home looked like, forgotten the sacrifices these walls represented. "Look, Dad, about Christmas," he began, then stopped. "Jessica and I have been talking, and we think maybe we were too hasty. The holidays are stressful, you know." "We weren't thinking clearly." I said nothing, just watched him squirm in the chair where he used to sit as a boy, telling me about his day at school. "Anyway," he continued, his voice gaining false confidence, "we were wondering if you might be able to help us out with something. Jessica's been wanting to redo the kitchen, and we found this contractor who can do it, but the quote came in higher than we expected. We're looking at about 30,000 and our home equity line is tapped out." So that was it. He needed money. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just access to my bank account. 30,000, I repeated slowly. "It's a lot, I know, but it would really increase the value of the house." "And you know that house will be yours someday anyway." He trailed off, realizing perhaps that he'd said the wrong thing. "Mine someday?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. David's face flushed deeper. "I mean, it will stay in the family." "For Emma and Tommy, you know? You'd be investing in their future." The audacity of it took my breath away. He locked me out of his house on Christmas Eve, and now he wanted me to pay to improve it. He wouldn't make room for me at his table, but he'd make room for my money in his bank account. I stood up slowly, my joints protesting. After sitting too long in the cold house, I could barely afford to heat properly anymore. David looked up at me expectantly, probably thinking my movement meant I was going to get my checkbook. "David," I said, my voice steady and calm, "do you remember what you said to me on Christmas Eve?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, like I said, we were stressed." "You said there was no room for me," I continued, cutting him off. "Your father, who worked double shifts to pay for your college, who walked you down the aisle at your wedding, who helped you buy that house you want to renovate. There was no room for me at your Christmas table. That's not how it was," he protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "That's exactly how it was." I walked to the mantel and picked up his wedding photo, the one where his arm was around my shoulders, and he was smiling like I was the most important person in his world. "You know, son, I've been thinking a lot about family lately. About what it means, about what it's worth." David's eyes followed the photo in my hands. "Dad, what are you getting at?" I set the photo down and turned to face him fully. "I'm getting at the fact that you made your priorities very clear that night. Your wife's comfort was more important than your father's feelings. Having enough space was more important than having family." "It wasn't like that," he said again. But now he was starting to look worried. "And now you come here, not to apologize, not to make amends, but to ask for $30,000 for a kitchen renovation." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Do you want to know what I've decided, David?" He nodded, though I could see the fear creeping into his eyes. "I've decided that if there's no room for me in your life, then there's no room for you in my will." The color drained from David's face. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I've changed my will. Everything, the house, the land, the retirement money, all of it, it's going to Emma and Tommy now." "You get nothing." David shot to his feet, his chair rocking back with the violence of the movement. "You can't do that." "I already have done it. It's signed, sealed, and irrevocable." I felt a strange calm wash over me as I watched him process what I'd just told him. "Your children will be millionaires someday, David, but you'll have to earn your kitchen renovation the same way I earned everything I gave you, through hard work and sacrifice." "Dad, please," he said, and for the first time since Christmas, his voice broke with genuine emotion. "I made a mistake. I'm sorry. But you can't punish me like this." "I'm not punishing you," I said quietly. "I'm just ensuring that my money goes to family members who still want me around." 9. The fallout. David stood there for a long moment, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been panic. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "This is insane, Dad. You're willing to destroy our family over one misunderstanding." "I'm not the one who destroyed anything," I replied calmly. You did that when you decided I wasn't welcome in your home." He began pacing the room like a caged animal, running his hands through his hair. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?"
That money! It's supposed to help us raise the kids, pay for their college, secure their future. And it will, I said.
"It will secure their future beautifully. They'll never have to worry about money for college or anything else. The difference is they'll control it, not you. They're children."
He exploded.
"They can't manage that kind of money." "No, but their trustees can. Harold Martinson will oversee everything until they're old enough to make their own decisions. And unlike their father, I trust Harold to put their interests first." David stopped pacing and stared at me with something approaching hatred.
You think you're teaching me some kind of lesson? All you're doing is being a vindictive old man. His words stung, but I didn't let it show. Perhaps.
"But this vindictive old man earned every penny you thought you were entitled to. And now this vindictive old man has decided to give it to people who actually love him." "The kids do love you," David protested. "This whole thing is between you and me. Don't drag them into it." "I'm not dragging them into anything. I'm giving them a gift, a very generous gift that will set them up for life." I moved closer to him, and he actually took a step back. "The question is, what are you going to tell them about why their grandfather isn't around to see them enjoy it?" That hit home. I could see it in his face, the realization that he would have to explain to Emma and Tommy why Grampy wasn't coming to Christmas anymore, why family gatherings had become smaller and colder. "This is blackmail," he said desperately. "No," I corrected. "Blackmail would be if I offered to change the will back in exchange for something. I'm not offering that. What's done is done." David pulled out his phone, and for a moment I thought he was going to call someone, maybe Harold, maybe Jessica. Instead, he scrolled through what looked like his contact list, his fingers shaking slightly. "I'll contest it," he said finally. "I'll get a lawyer and fight this." "You do that," I said mildly. "Harold assures me that the will is ironclad, but you're welcome to spend whatever money you have left trying to break it." He shoved the phone back in his pocket and headed for the door, then turned back one more time. "You know what, Dad? Maybe Jessica was right. Maybe we are better off without you." With that, he was gone, slamming the front door hard enough to rattle the windows. I watched through the curtains as he sat in his car for several minutes, probably calling Jessica, probably telling her what a terrible person his father had turned out to be. The silence that followed his departure was different from the Christmas morning quiet. This wasn't the absence of celebration. This was the sound of bridges burning, of relationships ending, of choices becoming permanent. But as I sat back down in my chair, I found I didn't regret it. For weeks I'd felt powerless, like a victim of David's callousness. Now I felt like I'd taken control of my own story. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Harold. "Robert," he said, without preamble, "I just got an interesting call from a lawyer named Peterson. Claims to represent your son. Apparently David wants to discuss your recent will changes." "I told you he'd try to fight it," I said. "Indeed." "Peterson wanted to know if there was any possibility of negotiation. I told him what you instructed me to say, that the will is final and irrevocable." He didn't sound happy. "Well, good," I said, and I meant it. "Robert," Harold said carefully, "are you prepared for what comes next? David isn't going to give up easily, and this could get ugly." I looked around my empty house at the family photos that would soon be painful memories, at the life I'd built that was now crumbling around me. "Harold," I said, "it's already ugly. At least now it's ugly on my terms. Part 10, A Father's Final Christmas Gift. It's been 8 months since that February confrontation, and the legal challenges Harold predicted never materialized. David's lawyer took one look at the will structure and advised him that contesting it would be expensive and futile. I haven't seen my son since that day, though I've heard through Mrs. Patterson, who still talks to Jessica at the grocery store, that they had to cancel the kitchen renovation. Apparently, David had been counting on my money more than I'd realized, but I have seen Emma and Tommy. 3 weeks after David stormed out of my house, Jessica brought them by for a visit. She stood awkwardly in my doorway while the children ran to me with their usual enthusiasm, chattering about school and friends and all the small dramas of childhood. "Robert," Jessica said quietly while the kids played in the living room, "I want you to know that what happened at Christmas, that was David's decision, not mine. I thought you should be there." I studied my daughter-in-law's face, looking for deception, but found only tired honesty. "Then why didn't you say something?" She sighed. "Because David is my husband, and sometimes you have to choose your battles. But I've told him he was wrong, and I've told him he needs to fix this." "It's too late for that," I said gently. "I know," she replied, "and I understand why you did what you did. Those children adore you, and they deserve to benefit from that love." Since then, Jessica has brought Emma and Tommy to see me every few weeks. David doesn't know about these visits. Jessica made that clear, but she believes it's important for the children to maintain a relationship with their grandfather. Emma, now 9, has started asking why Daddy gets upset when she mentions our visits. Tommy, at 5, doesn't understand the adult complexities, but knows that Grampy gives the best hugs and always has cookies in the kitchen. I've started keeping a journal for them, writing down family stories and memories they'll want to know someday. Stories about their grandmother Sarah, about the house they'll inherit, about the sacrifices and love that built the fortune they'll eventually control. I write about David too. Not the bitter man who locked me out on Christmas Eve, but the boy who used to help me rake leaves, who cried when our old dog died, who once told me I was his hero. They should know that their father wasn't always the person who chose pride over family. Sometimes I wonder if I was too harsh, if there might have been another way to handle David's betrayal. But then I remember standing on his doorstep in the snow, holding gifts that would never be opened, and I know I made the right choice. The money will go to Emma and Tommy because they still see me as Grampy, not as an inconvenience. They still run to me with scraped knees and homework questions and excited stories about their day. They still love me unconditionally, the way family should. David taught me that love can be conditional, that family loyalty has limits, that even the strongest bonds can be broken by selfishness and cruelty. But Emma and Tommy have taught me something else, that real love transcends the failures of one generation and finds its way to the next. My son locked me out on Christmas Eve, thinking he was making more room for the people who mattered. What he actually did was make room for his children to inherit everything he thought belonged to him. In the end, I suppose it really was the
perfect Christmas gift, just not the one either of us expected.
The inheritance is secure, the legal documents are filed, and Harold assures me everything is in order. When the time comes, Emma and Tommy will learn that their grandfather's love came with the ultimate security. The knowledge that family loyalty once lost can be reborn in the next generation.
That's not revenge, that's hope.